Hello, everybody, and welcome to this introductory session to the Kusto Query Language. The idea with today's session is to provide you with an introduction to writing your own queries in the context of Azure Monitor and also Microsoft Sentinel. And towards the end of the session, we will also look at how you can use the same query language to query the Azure platform in Azure Resource Graph. My name is Vanessa Brewer. I'm a principal engineer in the Fast Track for Azure team, and I'm based in Ireland. With me, I have my wonderful colleague, Saul. Saul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Vanessa. Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Saul Dolgan. I'm a senior engineer with the Fast Track for Azure team. Happy to be here today. Thanks for the intro, Vanessa.
Great. And then we're not alone. We have with us our wonderful colleague, Nisha, who will be standing by to answer your questions in the chat. Our fabulous producer, Kimberly, will also be sharing some links from time to time as it's relevant or as you answer questions or ask questions in the chat. Then we've put together a collection of handy resources for you, so you can scan the QR code and get access to that, or just follow the link. We've put together these resources for you. It's some learning materials and sample queries, which you can use to refresh yourself after the session or even expand your knowledge. Don't worry if you don't catch the link now. Our lovely producer will also share this link in a few times during this session. Great, so what are we looking at today, Saul?
Well, here's the summary. We'll start with kind of just getting our bearings around what we're here to talk about today. Of course, that's the Kusto Query Language, KQL, and a little bit of the more general ideas of why you would want to be learning a skill like KQL today, the kinds of places you might find it, how to navigate the interface for writing your first queries within the Azure portal experience, some tips and tricks along the way. And then, of course, we'll get into the real core of the content. So we'll start off kind of slowly and build upon the queries and have some fun examples as we go with some filtering, some sorting. We'll show you how to do that with KQL and maybe how that compares or contrasts against other query languages. And then we'll slowly, again, build upon that, showing some of the techniques that you might use for aggregates, some of the scalar functions for things like manipulating strings. And then, of course, we want to get insights. So we'll be looking at rendering graphs and how to make some visualizations very easily using KQL. Very nice language for that. And then some more advanced parsing of text for maybe log records that we have stored and we need to see them broken out into different fields for evaluation. So that's an important concept. And then finally, for dessert, we'll take a look at one of the other places that you might find this. We're going to focus a bit today. Vanessa's going to take us through KQL in the context of monitoring, essentially. You can find KQL in many different places. It's not just for use for monitoring. Azure Resource Graph, as I mentioned, is a very tasty dessert. We're going to get a quick look and see how you might use these same KQL skills to really get a handle around your resources in the Azure environment. Sound good?
Fantastic. Okay, so shall we get started then? So, I think I saw a question that says, where do you use this language? So there are a number of places in Azure where you would use the Kusto Query Language or KQL. Primarily, it started off being used really in Azure Data Explorer. We're not going to look at Azure Data Explorer today, but we've got this great monitoring platform called Azure Monitor, and the underlying infrastructure for Azure Monitor is really Log Analytics, which is a query platform. So we're going to really flip into doing our queries in Azure Monitor, but we will also look at a few queries that you can use with Microsoft Sentinel. So if we can flip to my screen, Kimberly, then we can get started, and I'll show you around through the interface. So here I'm in a Log Analytics workspace. You can also run these queries from various other places in the portal that I'll show you as we go through. Now here, like I said, I'm in a Log Analytics workspace, and I'm going to flip over to logs over here to start showing you this interface. So really the purpose of the language is to go and query all those things that you're collecting with Azure Monitor, Sentinel, and a few other things into your Log Analytics workspace. If it's the first time that you click into Log Analytics, you may have this experience of the sample queries that pop up. These sample queries are categorized by different kinds of workloads and things that you may want to run queries against. So if I just scroll through here, I can see there's some queries here for applications. There are some for databases. I've got some here for virtual machines. There are a whole bunch of these sample queries. And these queries are really there. They're provided to us by the product groups and really there to get us started. But they don't always answer all the questions. Now, this experience will pop up every time if you have this always show queries toggle enabled. I tend to switch it off after a while because I'm quite used to using this interface and I use it a lot. And so now I've got the queries gone. Now, if I wanted to get back to those queries, I can just click on queries over here again, and then I've got those back again. So if you do switch off the always show queries, then you can just switch that on again, or you can just click on queries and you can get it back. So you don't have to worry that it's gone forever. Now let me just give myself some more real estate here and then I'll talk you through the rest. Now, you would be correct if you think about Log Analytics as a database. It works just like any other database. So if you're using SQL or MySQL, Cosmos, or any of those, you've got a few concepts that are the same for Log Analytics. The first of these is that we use the concept of tables. Now, on the left-hand side here, we can see we've got a tables tab. And down at the bottom here, we've got those tables again grouped for you into these categories. So if I'm looking for something relating to Sentinel, for example, there I've got my Microsoft Sentinel folder. If I expand that, I've got a few tables here that were created for Sentinel. If I'm looking for something around maybe my virtual machines, there I've got Azure Monitor for virtual machines. And again, I've got those tables there. Now, if you're following along in your workspace, you may not have all the same tables I do because I've got a lot of things switched on here. So, I may have a lot more tables than you do. But I'll expand log management here. This is where a lot of the logs end up sitting if you're not using all the other solutions or insights and things like that. And you'll notice here you've got a lot of tables. And as I hover my mouse over these tables, you'll notice there's this flyout that gives me a little bit more about this table. So I'm going to put my mouse here over Azure Activity, and there I can see, first of all, it gives me the name of the table again. It's got a little star here, which means I can add it to my favorites. So if I click on that star up at the top here, I've got some favorites over here, and it means I can easily access this table again. There are a few other things that we get from that flyout. So first of all, we can say use an editor, and it'll just load it up into the editor that I'll speak about shortly. We get a bit of a description here about what this table is about. With some tables, you may have some tags, and there we can see all the tags relating to this table. And then we've got some useful links down at the bottom. Now, what that will do is it'll actually link you back to the table schema. So if you're not sure first of all, where this table comes from or what kind of things you should see in this table schema is a really great way for finding this. So here I can see it gives me the name of the table again. It tells me exactly where it comes from. It tells me the categories of resources that will write into it. It tells me which folder or category I should see it in my Log Analytics workspace. And then it shows me all the resource types that would write to this table. So this is quite a hefty list here. But it also links you back to the overall schema. So here, if you see a table that you're not sure of, or you want to kind of see, ooh, this looks interesting, where does this come from? You could kind of go and scroll through that and just find more information about these, and also what solutions you may need to switch this on. So that's the table schema, very handy. The last thing then that we get in this flyout is see preview data. And if I click on that, it should give me sort of a last few entries into this table, just so that I can kind of see what this looks like. So is this something that I want to work with? Is this the right table that I'm looking at? Is this the table that I'm looking at? maybe it's not. So I can then go and look again at any of the other tables and do the same, have the same experience. I can go and see, do I have a lot of stuff in here? Is this what I'm looking for? Maybe. Okay, great. So the next thing that we then have is we've got this query window, and this is where we would write our query. So if you're used to writing queries in the context of something like SQL or something, you would be familiar with a query, with the query editor space. And then the last thing that we have is on the bottom here, we've got either the query results that will come or the query history. Now, I haven't run any queries in this workspace yet, so I've got no history there. But you'll see, as we go through the session and we start building up queries, this will start filling up with the last number of queries that I've run, and it makes it easy for you to, if you've accidentally closed your browser, to just kind of get back to that query that you've last run. Great. So there are a few things that if you're starting to write queries, it's always a good idea to not just do a select star from table kind of thing like you do in SQL. We've got the ability, first of all, to control the time range over here. So when I'm doing an exploration or starting to just look at the data, it's a good idea to start off with a very small time window. So if we say the last hour, we'll start off with that. So what I'm going to do is now I want to just run a query against one of my tables. I'm going to, let's look for something that looks interesting. So there I've got maybe, let's see if Azure Metrics has something in. There is something interesting in Azure Metrics. Okay, great. So I can now go and write out Azure Metrics there, but I am tremendously lazy. Saul, you know this. You've seen how lazy I am. And so what I can do is I can actually just double click on Azure Metrics, and that automatically adds it to that window for me. And now if I click run, it will give me all the results for the last hour.
It's one of the things I really like about this platform, Vanessa. The interface here really does have a lot of features for lazy engineers like ourselves. That's one good example. I also like the favorites, the idea that you can take a table and hit the star. That's one that I use all the time because I always forget which solution, which category these tables are under. So of course,
Exactly.
you can them, but the star is a nice one that I use all the time too.
Yeah, and we can do the same with those queries as well. So we have the ability, so I showed you the queries over there, but we've also got the queries over here. So again, I can go and say, actually, this is a query that I run all the time. Let me just go and add that to my favorites. And there we've got the favorites again. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you very quickly is before we, what this does is, what I've now done is, in essence, just a select star from table. So select everything from this table. But for us to become a bit smarter, we need to add some filters to these tables. So I'm going to show you very quickly how to just with one click, add a filter without you having to type something complex. So here I've expanded one of these results. So you can see I can expand it rather than having to scroll across. And I am going to say, I'm really interested in this metric. So I'm going to right click on that and say, include incoming messages. And if I run that now it will filter all my results just to that. How cool is that?
That's very cool. I don't think you can do that quite as easily with what is it, SQL Management Studio. This is a nice way to get started if you're just learning how to write your first filter. It couldn't get any easier. This is great.
So do you think you want to try writing your own query, Saul?
Yeah, I think that this really is a good segue. Kimberly, we're going to move into the next section now, which is really all around filtering and sorting. So I'll go ahead and take over the screen share, and we'll just show a few examples of how we might do that. So Vanessa, you've done a great job of getting us started and getting us through the interface. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and close out that query and start with a fresh one. By the way, you can see in my environment, Vanessa had pointed out that as you run your queries, you'll see a history of them here at the bottom. Again, this is another great kind of lazy engineer feature where we make it as easy as possible for everyone to just come back to, what was that query I ran again? you can find a full history here and run those at any time, or even search across them. So I think the example that I've been playing with really has been for Azure Activity. And by the way, we have IntelliSense support here. I think you'll be happy to see that if you're a fan of Easy. And really, to do some kind of a filter here, maybe I want to just see, like, what does that schema look like again? Another great way to see the schema would be using this pipe character, which says, take that first table and then just give me the first 5 records from that. I'm going to get a look at this, right?
And while
so,
that
Vanessa,
runs, it's maybe, sorry,
go ahead.
I just wanted to say it's maybe good to think of this as like a child of your normal structured query language, and also PowerShell. That's where those pipes become really important to consider, because it passes your command on from one to the next line.
Yeah, that's something about KQL I've noticed, right? Is that it's kind of borrowed the best of a number of different languages. So it's clearly it's a query language at the core, but it also has this idea of piping in one command to the next. That reminds me of PowerShell or some Bash scripting, perhaps. There's some other things that you see in here that remind me of like C# or Link or something like that. But it's taken the best of everything, in my opinion, and it's a great language because of that. So yeah,
Exactly.
this was just as kind of like a sidetrack on filtering. Take is a great command if you just want to say, give me 5 records back, give me 10 records back. I just want to see a sample. This is similar to that preview that you were showing us, Vanessa. And you had shown us the easiest way to build a filter, perhaps, would be to come in, look at what we have here, and say, all right, just click on that, right-click, and say, I want to build a where clause. So where, this is essentially how we filter things. I'm going to clean this up a little bit and say, I want everything, but just from the administrative category. Okay, so if I run that, we should now see in the results, just like we did with your example, Vanessa, that everything that's coming back now is really coming back from, like, scroll over a bit, we should see that it's from this category, administrative, which is nice, right? Now, maybe I want to do something else here. Vanessa, you had mentioned that we have this time range at the top. It's a very easy way to limit how many records are coming back. And it's a good idea, by the way, to limit the records that do come back. But you can also do that with a time-based filter in the query itself. So in my case, I don't have anything in the last hour from administrative. Let's just see if we have some data, maybe from the last 4 hours. Okay, so we've got some data coming back. But let's say I want a more specific time-based filter. I want to look at things from the past 2 days or something like that. So you can certainly build a where clause that says, let's look at the time generated, which is when these things enter the log, is within the last 2 days. So that's syntax right here. I don't want anyone to get too upset about this, but what we're doing is using a function that says, look at things from 2 days ago and greater, right? So that's, you can see here, it's smart enough to pick up that we're not going to adhere to the time range that was set here anymore. And it says set in query to indicate that we have a custom time filter now. So now I should be able to see
runs, I wanted to mention time generated. Every single table in Log Analytics will always have time generated as the timestamp. So it doesn't matter whether you're running it against the Azure Activity table or against the metrics table or one of the Sentinel tables. The time generated table column will always be your timestamp column.
That's right. Good point. So this is essentially, this is the basics of how you start building your filters. The where clause is where it's at for putting these together. Really, there's the easy way to get started, as Vanessa had pointed out initially, which would be to just look at the results as you're exploring and kind of learning, investigating the data that you're working with in a table. It's a very simple way to start building those clauses. And then you can get really fancy. You can even do something like, let's say, between. Which is the idea of saying, I want to look at things from, let's say, we'll do 2 days ago, and then this is the special syntax to say, let's go to 5 days ago, perhaps. Right, so now we've got a different customized time range filter that should give us everything from, well, let's see. I think I messed up.
You may want to put the older dates before the newer dates.
Oh, okay. Let's try that. How does that look?
Well, now you're going to do 5 days ago to 5 days ago. So, yes. No, I mean, what that's going to do, obviously, is it's going to take exactly now, your current time, 5 days ago. Now, say you wanted to look at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. So maybe you wanted to look at yesterday, the whole day. What you could actually do is in front of the ago, you could say start of day and make it start of day 1. So if you just type start of day, there we go, and make it go 1 day, and then again do it end of day.
How does that look?
And then, perfect. And then just make it 1 day again, because we've obviously, and that will then run it for the whole day yesterday.
Excellent. See, so we're getting really fancy here. We're doing it live. That's fantastic.
Perfect. And now obviously,
sorting. Did you have something you want to add?
Well, I wanted to just say you can now obviously add a whole bunch of different filters. So you don't just have to have the one line of filters. So you can now go and say, you know, I want to see in that time frame, I want to see where it's this kind of thing. Maybe you're looking at a specific resource. But it's really important to remember that because it works a little bit like PowerShell, you know, it applies those filters in order. So again, if you've got something that maybe doesn't exist in that time range, you'll have what you're having now, because maybe we have no informationals in yesterday. Maybe yesterday was all something else, or, you know, there we go. And because I suck at spelling, I always do the right click thing, because it means you've cut out the human error.
That's just what I need to start doing, because as you can see, like I told you, I can't remember where the tables are sometimes. There's just so many of them. And sometimes I can't remember which category it was that I need to filter on. But yes, again, we've got those usability features just to try and minimize how much we have to think about this stuff. And I'm right there with you. Yeah. So yeah, sorting. If we can move on, I think that's the next kind of concept. If we're building upon these queries and you've got something back, you filter down to the records that are of interest to you. Just like with other query languages, there's no guarantee in order in most of these systems. So you might generate a different set or a different order to the records that come back, depending on the type of filter you set. So if you wanted to start getting some control around the sequence that things come back in, then we start talking about the order, right? So this is similar, very similar to the SQL syntax. If you're following from database land, you would use something known as an order by clause. So in this case, I just want to make sure that it is in chronological order. And just like, again, with other query languages, you have this idea of ascending and descending. So if I wanted to look at things in descending order, which would say, give me everything from the end of the day at the very top, and then work your way back in time to the start of the day. This is what the order by clause would then look like. We'll give that a go. And what we should see here is the oldest information record from 10 p.m. last night coming back first. And then if we scroll through this list, you can see it's getting earlier and earlier in time, right? Anything you would add to that?
No, that's it. And I think, you know, we'll obviously come back to a few of these as we go through some more. So maybe what I can show you now is how to start doing some of the more interesting things, because I think everyone kind of gets how to filter now.
I agree.
Okay, so shall I grab the screen again? Shall we go back to me? Okay, so we've got now the ability, we've seen how we can do filters, so I can go and do some more filters if I wanted to. But you know, one of the things that I do, and especially if we're starting to work with things like, especially tables where we've got lots of different things coming in, maybe we actually want to see, you know, what kind of things we're capturing. So if I look here, I'm going to go back to my Azure Matrix table here. I know I collect a whole bunch of different things in here, and I've got maybe lots of different resources. I've got maybe a few different resource groups that I'm collecting for, or maybe, you know, in this case, I've got a whole bunch of different metrics that I'm collecting here. So if I just want to get a list of these, how do I do that? So I'm going to introduce you to a new friend called summarize. So I can use the summarize operator, and I can say just summarize by, and if I just kind of like click away there because I don't want the auto complete there, I can see this column is called metric name. And if I go and say just summarize by metric name and run that, that just gives me a list of all the metrics that I'm collecting in here. Okay, so that's great. It shows me a whole bunch. I may even have some more if I expand this time range. So let's go and run this for the last 12 hours, because there may be some resources that don't give me metrics straight away. And I can see I've got quite a lot here, but it doesn't actually tell me which resources it is. So I can go and string this together and say I also want to see this by resource provider, maybe, first of all. So if I again go and run that, that then tells me, okay, great, I can see here I've got from AAD, I get a whole bunch of different performance counters. There from Kusto, I get a whole bunch of different ones, Event Hub and storage. Okay, great, so now I know what I'm working with. So from here again, I can go and say, okay, great, I am really interested in maybe my AAD processor time here. So I can now go and add my filters from here. If I go and do that, and if I run this, what do you think is going to happen, Saul?
I think it's going to get pretty. It's going to actually show you more detail around just the processor time metric, right?
Well, actually, it's just going to give me that list because I left the summarize in here because it gives it to me in order, right?
That's right. This reminds me of the group by clause. If this is the closest thing to what a database administrator saw, it summarizes the same as group by, right?
Exactly, exactly. Now I can now go and comment out that line, and to comment it out, it's just the 2 slashes in the front. The keyboard shortcut for that is Control/, and then it quickly comments or uncomments for you. So if I run this now it should give me all the detail, and there I go. So now I can see all of that, and it's filtered on that, on that resource provider and just on that performance counter. So I can now start doing a few extra things here. Well, actually, before I do that, let's show you something else with just that basic one. So if I go back to this, just the summarize by metric name, I'll just bring that back. It gives us the full list again. But maybe I want to really know how many entries I've got for each of these. So after summarize now, I can insert count and just keep it as summarize count by and then the metric name and resource provider. And if I run this now, it'll actually give me this list of exactly how many entries I've got for that time period. So there I've got my count column. I can see exactly, how many entries I've got for each of them. It's quite nice and consistent for the AAD ones, but I can see for some of the others, they are not as frequent entries. And so I have some not as much data to work with. So this is also a nice way for you to kind of figure out, is this something that's worthwhile? Is 12 hours enough time for me to work with? If I'm looking at a 4-hour period, do I only have 3 entries? Does it make sense? So a good way for you to go and do that. I could also, from here, go and do a top 10 by count, and that will then give me a top 10 list. So, we'll start looking just now at things like, how do I know which of my top users logging in or something like that? That's where you could then go and use that. But let's then go back to this wonderful query. So we'll just uncomment those 2 lines. We'll go back to commenting that one out. So we've got all the goodness back. And really what I'm interested in, because I've got so many entries, and I suspect I've got one sort of for every few minutes. Yeah, it looks like it's sort of collecting every minute, possibly. So maybe what I want to start doing is looking at, what do my averages look like over a certain time period? So here I've got a few different numeric columns. I've got the total, I've got maximum, minimum, and an average that I can work with. So again, we can use our friend summarize. And this time, what I can do is I can actually do an aggregation of that numeric value. So if I have a look here, the column is called average. So I can say here, give me the average of average. And then what I want to do is maybe group it by, and let's see, we've got one resource maybe. Do we have a, yeah, we've got one resource. I'll just do this by resource. And if I do this now we should have something that looks slightly different. So now I can see for the last 12 hours, the average CPU processor time was 6.5%. Okay, fantastic. But maybe we really care about looking at this in a bigger way, because looking at something like a performance counter once off over a time period is maybe not as interesting. Really what we want to start seeing is that, what does it look like over a certain time? So what we can do is we can say we want to break this down into time buckets. And to create those time buckets, we use the bin operator. Now we need to tell it what this timestamp is, and tell me what this timestamp column is, Saul.
It was time generated, right?
There we go. So we know it's always time generated. And then we need to tell it how big our bucket should be. Now we're looking at a 12-hour period, so we probably don't want to look at 1-minute buckets, because that's what we're collecting in any way. Maybe what we want to look at is maybe 30-minute buckets. So I could just use our shortcut for time, which is 30M. That's always 30 minutes. If I wanted to look in 1-hour increments, I could make it 1H. But let's start with 30-minute buckets. Okay, so that will then create that and then group it by that resource. So if I now go and run this query for the last 12 hours, now we will see we've got for that resource, every half an hour, there's a timestamp. So it aggregates it into those 30-minute buckets for us, and it gives us that value. Now, this is great. It's something that you could then start using for alerts, maybe. And I'll show you another example where it's really good for alerts. But we also have this very handy button over here called chart. And so very quickly, I get that visibility of, what is my utilization over the last 12 hours, and what does the trend look like?
That's pretty powerful, Marissa. Just to mention that when we got to the bin function, that's where things really start to take off, in my opinion, because that the KQL language is really good at statistics, and it's really good at trying to make it easier to drive insight. And this bin function in particular, the idea of putting things into buckets very easily, that might be a little more difficult to do in other languages that are not focused on things like statistics. That was great.
Exactly. Shall we look at one more example of that, just to sort of make it a little bit more real? So I think, maybe let's look at something like what we've got for our virtual machine. So let's quickly have a look. We'll start over with this table. Just go and run it for the last hour. Make sure we've got some performance counters here. This is everything that VM Insights collects. And there I can see I've got some CPU, I've got logical disk free space. Disk free space is always an interesting one that everyone wants to look at. So let's go and have a look at that one. So there I've got, for this machine, I've got a free space counter. So let's go and have a look at that. Let's see if it will allow me to scroll again. I'm having some technical challenges today, apparently, with scrolling. I'm not so good at scrolling. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to just filter on logical disk, the percentage free space. Now we've got one extra thing here. We've got the disk actually presented as a nested option. So I'm going to introduce you to a whole new friend called extend. And again, because I'm lazy, I'm very happy that I can just right-click and go and extend that column. And what that does is it just passes the JSON for me, and I don't have to remember how to do that. I could rename this to disk, or I could call it Bob if I wanted to. We could call it Pink Fluffy Bunnies, which is quite a favorite of mine. And now if I run that, it will actually filter just on the free space and give me also all the disks there. So
just to pause there, Vanessa, I want to make sure we hit that, is that there's a few things going on here. Extend, which is a new thing here that we just introduced, which allows you to add additional columns or add additional properties coming back in the results. And then you can name them like an alias, whatever you want. That's the point. And you use disk in this case, right?
Exactly. And that's going to become particularly interesting when we look at resource graph a bit later.
Great.
Okay, now here we've got a numeric value here, so we can go and say, let's go back to our friend summarize. So I'm going to say summarize average. And in this instance, the numeric column is val. So we'll go and just use the val column. And we'll again say create the time buckets. And in this case, because we're looking at, let's look at this for the last 4 hours, but we'll look at this in 15-minute increments. And so what we want to do here is we want to really group this by the computer. But because we have multiple different disks, we also want to group it by that column that we created here. So I'm going to say also by disk. And you can see that column that I created in the previous line is now neatly presented to me as something that I can access through the IntelliSense. So again, we can run this, and there we've got now a nice little view of, which disks are doing well. There I've got some disks that are running out of space, so I probably should go and pay some attention to them, or maybe not. And, so let's go and have a look. And we can then again just go and click on the chart and see all of those.
It's really nice.
Okay. So I think the next thing then that we wanted to show, Saul, was how you can actually just draw the graphs without having to click the button.
That's right. It's
yeah.
As far as making charts easy, that was very easy, having that tab at the bottom that just brings you straight into some kind of a graphic. But I know that there's a lot more flexibility here, right?
Absolutely, because I can go and format this chart here, and I've got different options. But it's many clicks, and I really don't like all the clicks. So let's see how can we do this without having to click. So we have a render operator, and render gives us the ability to go and create charts on the fly without us needing to do all those different clicks. So you can see here that we've got a few different options. We've got area charts and bar charts and column charts and so on. The default, if you click on the chart button down at the bottom, will always be this column chart. But for things with the time range, I actually prefer using a time chart or a line chart so that I can see my train. So I'm going to flip it here to time chart. And now if I click that, I should have a very nice graph, and there I can see them. So I can see for each of my machines what the disk space looks like. So maybe not so interesting for disk space, but when you start looking at things like CPU or memory usage, things that are very volatile, this graph starts lighting up quite a bit for you. Now, the other thing that you can also do is, we've looked at doing this with things with numeric values, but what about things like when you're collecting actual logs? So if we think about something like, how often are my users logging in, or, how many security events am I collecting and how often are they coming in? We can go and do the same kind of thing. So I'm going to, from the Sentinel tables, I've got this security event table. I can go and see, I've got a whole bunch of different events here just for the last hour. I really want to see which of my machines are causing the noise. So without even adding any filters, I can again go and say summarize. Now, in this instance, I won't use the average because we don't have a number value that we can aggregate out. Instead, we will go back to using count. But now the rest of it looks the same. So I can now go and again create my time bucket and say, what is my time bucket? We maybe want to look at the last 24 hours, do this into 1 hour increments and see which computers are causing this. So if I go and run that, there we go. I can see, exactly per time or in those time buckets when the machines are the noisiest. I can again go and do that time chart and see exactly when the machines are causing event spikes. So whether you're working with something numeric or you're working with something that is more log type, you can still have that graph experience.
So Vanessa, I want to take a pause here and ask you, because it looks like a few minutes ago there was a question about using KQL for querying user data of different kinds. So I may get this wrong interpreting what we mean by user data. Of course, you could store other things in a workspace that represent user activity, but I know in security events we have things like log on and log off, right? Is that something you could just show us a quick query of how to maybe render by time login?
Absolutely. So I'll just go and run this again for a slightly shorter time period. And, we get a whole bunch of different events. Now, first of all, we've got an activity in the security event. You can see there we've got a few different things. So let's see if we can find out which event is the logon event. So first we'll go and just do summarize by activity so that we can see those events and see which ones we need to kind of work with. And there we can see we've got account logged on and account logged off. Okay, so let's go and see what we can do for this event. So I'll just, again, go and filter on that one. Oh, no, wait, that's not going to work. See, I only selected that line, so the query didn't work. And there I can see I've got, different kinds of logons. Maybe I'm not so interested in the machine logons, so maybe I want to filter out where the type is machine. So we'll just, and did you see there, instead of include, I said exclude, and now it's done that. So now it will not include the machines in that query. So let's go and make that slightly longer and see if we've got some user logins. And there I can see I've got some user logins with the account that was actually logged in. And if I now go and make this maybe for the last 3 days, I can see, again, now we can go and summarize count. And we can even just say we don't want to necessarily see it over time. We don't necessarily give the user, or we don't need to see what the user's trend is. We really just want to see how many times this user's logged in. Yep. So we can actually just go and say summarize count by account. And that gives us the count for that time, so we can see our users. Now, I may not have very many interesting users here, but hopefully you have more. Now, I did see we've got a question from the audience that asks if there's a cost for this. So there's no cost for you to run the queries whatsoever. Obviously, for log analytics, as you're ingesting data, there is a cost for that, the data ingestion, and maybe our wonderful moderator or producer can share the log analytics costs in the chats for you. But once the data is in there, there's no cost for running these queries.
That's awesome. Vanessa, could you show us one more example of a different type of graph? I've seen a few pie chart examples that might be interesting. Maybe we could show something like a pie chart just to give me insight and a visual way of understanding some of this activity in a pie chart.
Sure. So let's think. Actually, maybe the security alerts are quite interesting. Let's see if I've got any. I should. You never want security alerts, but hopefully this time I do have some. Let's see if we've got some. Okay, that's also not great. So let's go and look back at the events. We'll go and look at. Oh, I've just made the worst mistake. And this is why you don't run for a long time period, because you will get the reminder that you should filter your queries a little bit better. But if we go and just do maybe that count by activity again, so we want to see summarize count by activity. If I just go and do this for the last 24 hours, so it doesn't shout at me again, there we go. I can see I've got a whole bunch of different ones. And now I should be able to say render and pie chart, and it will very quickly give me that pie chart of what my top activities are for these. So very quickly, and there I can go and drill into those as well.
Beautiful.
I suppose, it's great that you run it here, but there's one more thing that you have in the interface. There's always one more thing. From here, we actually have a pin to option. So once you've run this query, you can actually go and share it with others. So we've got the pin to option here, and there you can go and pin it to your dashboard in the Azure portal. If you're using Grafana, you can go and pin that to a Grafana dashboard. And you can also send this to a workbook. So whatever query you run here in this interface, you have the ability to go and kind of share it out in other places too.
That's cool. And just to be clear, these are live, right? So if I were to pin these to a workbook or a dashboard and then go and look at that day by day, it's going to be showing me a live result of what the query was used to build that pie chart, right?
Absolutely, yes. So, a nice quick way for you to build a dashboard is, think about these things, run the query, pin it, and there you've got a dashboard.
Excellent.
Okay. So that's drawing graphs, but I think one of the things that I may have sort of not shown you is how can we join some results together from two different tables, or even from different data sets in the same table. Now, Saul, I know you've got a very nice picture about how joins work. So should we first look at how joins work?
It is up on my screen if we can get Kimberly to show us for everybody. There we go. Thank you. So Vanessa,
Okay.
if you'd like to talk about this one, this is one of my favorite images from the modules that we actually have in today's bookmark collection. So definitely one to check out later and really study and understand in detail. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So when we talk SQL and all your edges, so we have the concept of first query and second query that we then join together. And that would then be first table and second table. And we talk about them as left and right. So the left table will always be your first query, and the right table your second query. Now you can chain a whole bunch of these together, obviously, but always the first query that gets executed will be left. So even if you're chaining together a few different joins, whatever precedes the next query that's executed will always be left. Now, if we're doing a join, we have different join types. There is a left inner join, or a left outer join, or a right inner join, right outer join, or just a sort of inner complete, Now, typically, if you don't specify the kind of join that you want, it assumes it's a left inner join, which will be a left semi in this picture. So it will, if you don't specify, it will then return only what is in common between the two different tables. So if you think about something like, I want to show log on events for a user and log off events for a user, and then correlate between the two, you don't really want to have log on events from other users or anything like that. You really want to be able to just correlate the two events that work together. Similar, if I want to kind of show, a list of machines or a list of resources plus some properties about them that come from a different table. So if you don't specify the kind of join, it'll always be left semi or left or a left inner join. We then have the ability to say, okay, we really want everything from the first query to be returned, but only where there are matches from the second table do we want things to be returned. So that would be then a left outer join. So it'll return everything from our first table where it has matches for the entries. It will give us results on both sides in the results. But where there's nothing to match in the right table, it will have blank spaces for us. And we'll see if we can make it more clear with the query. But it's just kind of important to remember this picture. So the other one just is obviously the right outer. So that just gives you the reverse. So it will only return from the left table what they have in common, but everything from the right table. Okay, so I hope that that made it clear. Or is there anything else you want to add, Saul?
I've seen this picture before, again, with other like relational database SQL type things. You've got this idea of joins, but it's good to see that we have the same support here. I would point out that as we talk a little bit later about, I think in Resource Graph, that it's a subset of the join types that are supported there. But for what we're talking about today with workspaces and Azure Monitor, everything that you see in this illustration is supported by the language.
Exactly. Okay, so should we have a look at a sample query or two on how this joining works? So if we can just flip back to my screen again, then I think, Kimberly, if we can just flip back to my screen, then we can continue with that. That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to continue working here with the security events, and actually let's talk about that example that I had just now. So I'm going to just go back to this query that we started with the summarize by activity. And I'm going to build both queries in this window so that you can see how that works. So I've already got the account successfully logged on here. And there I've got the account was logged off. So I'm going to just add that one in there. And so now we can build two queries. So we'll take the summarize out. We will go and say we want to first have the logon events. We're going to have a second query here for log off events. And let's go and just again run that one just to make sure we've got some results there. Okay, there we go. We've got some results for that one. Okay, that's great. Let's have a look at what the log off events look like. And again, okay, great. And we've got, again, that machine in there. So we'll go and just copy and paste that one in there so that we make sure that that matches, filter out the machines. We've got no log off events from machines. That is always wonderful. Okay, so that is really great.
Before you build this further, something that might not be familiar is this idea that you're selecting only a certain number of lines here, like a subset of what's in the query editor. I think it's important because this has gotten me a few times, is that when you run the query, it's only going to run what you selected there, right?
Exactly. And you'll see if I just click on that query, there's a bit of a gray background on it, which means that it's selected. Now, if I flip back to that one is selected, so you don't have to physically go and select the whole thing because sometimes your queries become quite long. But, here at least I can go and click in it and then it has that query selected as long as there is a gap between them. So if I take this gap out, now you can see the whole thing is great. So it's going to try and run both of them. And that may not give us the right result. So let's keep them a bit separate and make sure that we've got that.
Good
okay,
thank you.
I'm going to just, for this example, keep the machines in because apparently my users don't log out ever. So we'll go back to having this account logons. And I've made it for 7 days. So of course, that's going to give us quite a lot of results again. Okay, now what we want to do as well is we want to limit the columns that we return because really we don't care about all of these necessarily. What we really care about is just a few things. So we're going to now use the project operator, which allows us to do that. It's like in SQL where you say select and then column name, column name, column name from table. Project allows us to do that in Kusto. So I'm going to say I want the time generated column, I want the account, I want the computer where they are logging on, and maybe that's all that I really care about. So let's go and run that. And if I run that, now you can see I only get those 3 columns back. If I expand it, again, I only go and say, I really just want those 3 there. Well, again, just give me those. Okay, fantastic. We've got things that match. So I'll take the machines out of there because we don't care about those. And now I can go and do a join. So I'm not going to specify the join type. If I wanted to, I could say kind, and then it will tell me those are all the options that I've got. So there I've got left semi, right semi, you know, I've got full inner, full outer. I could just do an inner join, which would then be the left inner. But because I know it's going to assume that it's a left inner join, I can just put this round bracket here, take the space out between the 2 columns, and close that bracket. Now, the next thing that I then need to do is I need to tell it on both sides of the query, so the left table and the right table, what is the column that it needs to match on. Now, I have the ability to say, I want to do this on left, and then I could say account. Or what I could just do is I could say, I just want to match on account. I don't need to go and do complex things. I could really just tell it, as long as those 2 things are named the same in both queries, it will automatically match them for me. And now if I run that, because I didn't have any log off events, apparently, you know, there I have that issue. So I could now go and I could probably make this longer, but that is how it would work. So I could also say, rather than on account, I could make this on computer. This is not going to give us very good results because it may not match the account, but at least we've got some result. So now we can see we've got there based on computer, we've got a timestamp, a time 1 and a time 2. We've got the computer, and it's tried to match the accounts are not necessarily the same because the format is slightly different, but you know, we'll pretend that these are users. So that's one of the ways that you could do it. We could also do this with things like the performance counters, for example. So we could again go and say, if I have my performance counters, I want to show maybe CPU and memory for the same machine on the same line. So I can again go and say, I want to first of all go and filter on the CPU. So we'll just go and do that there and do the utilization percentage. And then I said memory is also a good one to have a look at. So of course now I'm scrolling. I should have just used my friend summarize, but we'll just pretend I didn't do that. So there is memory, and we'll just do the available megabytes. Okay, now let's split those into 2 different queries. We can go and do that. So now we've got that query and that query. We can then go and say we want the summarize average. We remember that this was the val column by computer. And we will do the same with the next one. And let's just go back to the query. And now we can go and do that join again. So again, we will go and join these 2 queries together on the computer this time. And if I run that, I should now have, for each of the machines, I have an entry for my CPU and an entry for my memory, and it's all on one line. So you could now do something fancy, like you could say, actually, I want to rename that column. So this is my CPU utilization equals, And we can say this is memory. And if I run that, that will then rename those columns. Now I know that it's actually CPU and memory, and that makes me a lot happier. And I've got both of those on the same line.
Just for a bonus, can you show us how to get rid of, I've noticed when you join, if the column appears in both of the tables that you're joining together, we've got that computer and then computer one. How do we get rid of that redundant column?
So you've got one of two options. You can either use project and only show the columns that you want to show. But if it's just one column that you want to get rid of, that you know, again, we're lazy, we don't want to type so much. What we could actually do is do project away and say computer one, so the column we don't want. And if I run that now, that then gives me just computer and CPU and memory.
Excellent. Nice.
Okay. So those are our joins. So I think the last thing in log analytics that I want to show you that may be quite handy is how to parse text. So, Saul, how much do you work with syslog messages?
Oh, you know, from time to time, if I have to deal with a Linux system, then of course syslog is where pretty much everything gets logged to, and a lot of times it's buried deep inside of some text record somewhere. The thing that I need to filter on, or user identities, things like that.
Okay, well, let's see if we can find an easier way for you to extract that kind of thing. So I've got some syslog messages that will hopefully return soon. And I collect here from like my entire home network. So I've got some all sorts of equipment writing things in here. So let's see if we can get some nice messages that we can parse. Actually, there's some nice ones. Actually, that one looks fairly interesting. But maybe we've got a few other things that we can have a look at. Maybe we don't want the infos, although that's quite a lot. Actually, let's not be silly. Let's go and summarize this by facility and also by severity level and see if we can find something interesting there to work with. I'm always interested in errors and things like that. So I'm going to first of all filter here on errors, just so we can get rid of some of that noise. So let's go and find one of those. That's starting to maybe look a little bit better. There we've got some very interesting messages there. I think this is something we can work with. Actually, I'm quite interested in this one. So let's go and look at that one. So we'll filter just on the user facility because that's where that message is, because it works better if the messages are a little bit consistent. So now if I just expand this column, there I can see I've got some interesting messages, maybe not so interesting. I was hoping for more of those kinds of ones. But let's see if we can work with that one actually, because that one is quite interesting. We've got there an IP address, it's got some other things. So let's see if we can work with this one. So my favorite operator really is the parse command because it allows us to extract these pieces of string from things. Now, what we need to do is we're going to use parse, and then we tell it which column we want to go and parse. And in this case, it's syslog message. And we say with, and now you've got the option here of going to add regular expression. It does support that. For today, I'm not going to go into regular expression, but just know that it does support it. And hopefully, I know that in the collection of links that we put together and resources that we put together for you, there are some things around regular expression with parsing as well. But now what I want to do is I really want to just extract that IP address there. So what I need to do is I need to tell the parse command what is before and after it. So what are the boundaries before and after it, so that it can successfully extract that for me. Now, in this case, it's fairly easy. It's got for and then the quote. So what I'm going to do is I'm just actually going to go and copy that from that message and say, you can ignore everything up until here. And then when it gets to 4, and we'll put that into single quotes because we've got a double quote there that we want to include in this. And then I can say IP address to parse. I could also, again, call it pink fluffy bunnies if I wanted to, but, you know, and then I can say after this new column or this piece of string that I want to parse, that is the closing boundary there. So we'll copy that, put it again between single quotes, and because we've got a double quote there, and I can say after failed, I really don't care about everything else. So does this make sense so far?
It looks fancy, but yes, it does. I like it.
Okay, so now if I did this right and didn't make any spelling mistakes, what I should have is for that error or for that message, that one, I should actually have a very new column. So if we go and expand this one, down at the bottom, there we go. We've got a new column with the IP address that came from that message. Now I could do this slightly with more things. So if we go and have a look at another example. So maybe we want to just take those 2 lines out, look at another error that maybe has a few more things in the message that looks slightly interesting. Actually, what we'll do is we'll pretend this message is really interesting.
Sure.
So again, we will use parse, so select message width, and we're going to say we can see that it fails to start something. So we'll say that is our beginning boundary. So we don't care about anything up until there. So we'll put that between quotes. And now it's going to say failed item, just because I'm very unimaginative. And we'll say the extension is something that we can ignore. That is another boundary. And we'll do the dash there, and then we can say other thing. Okay. Now, because we really care about it all the way to the end, I'm not going to put another a wildcard there, but I could actually say, you know, the closing boundary there is that full stop right at the end there. Hopefully that's visible. There is a full stop over there. So if I just go back to the, you know, go and do that. Now, if I run this, we should have a whole bunch of new columns. If I can just go and restore my view, then we can see for those ones there we've got, for that one, we should now have 2 new columns. There we go. There's failed item, which is that Microsoft Azure Linux patch, and there is the auto assessment.
Beautiful. So then you could use those as structured columns and do where clauses and sorting and all the other great things that we've seen here today with what you've parsed out into a structured piece of detail, right? This is great.
Exactly. So there is my failed item, and I can also say, you know, go and group those together. And so where it hasn't parsed it because the message didn't match, we'll have a blank line, and there we can see we've got 24 of those that have that. So there's one more place in Log Analytics where this is super handy, and this is especially around the insight metrics. If we go and look at the insight metrics, we've got a whole bunch of different things. And for each of the resources, we've got, you know, some nice information. We've got the VM name and things like that. But one of the things we don't have is really the resource group exposed very neatly here. So what we could do is we could actually go and parse the resource ID and say, because in the resource ID, we get the resource group for each machine. So we could say parse the resource ID with, and we say ignore everything up until this point. And then now we've got the RG name. And now again, we can say after the resource group name, it'll always be providers. And so that is our closing boundary, and we just run it like that. This now means that you could very easily create a workbook or even alerts based on resources in a specific resource group. So I can again go and just say summarize count by RG name, and I can see all my resource groups, and I can see now how many counters I've got. I could go and say, give me only the CPU counters for everything in that specific resource group. So very handy when you're working with both the VM Insights metrics as well as the metrics that come from your Azure resources.
That's excellent. I could think of probably a dozen different places where that's going to come in handy, because resource IDs, of course, are everywhere, it seems. And in fact, we're going to talk in a minute here about resource graph and the use of KQL within that world. Before we get to that, Vanessa, do you mind? I want to just draw your attention to kind of a theme of questions that have come in from our viewers around time and the idea. Essentially, I think what we're getting at here is that these log workspaces, there's data being ingested into them real time and continuously, right? So this idea of, can I build a near real time type of dashboard? How often can I query this? And it reminds me that there's some things that are built into the language that I think we should talk about to help understand how you might be able to get a snapshot. You might know that I'm talking about materialize here. But the idea of saying, sometimes I want the data that I'm querying, or maybe the data that I'm joining against, to stay still, to stop being updated if there is new data that comes in being ingested. This whole idea that maybe you want things to kind of be pinned, if you will, before you join against it, or the idea that maybe I want to see what's new. Maybe I'm building an alert and I want to say, well, what's actually come in the last period since the last time I ran this query. Can you address that for us?
Yes, I think with materialize is typically not so widely used in log analytics. I'm going to kind of skip over that one. But if we think about things like, I just want to see the new things coming in, and especially for things like alerts, that's where that filtering on the timestamp works. So if we maybe go and think about things like, we'll use one of the queries we've run already. We've got a few of these around performance. So if I go and do the maybe the CPU and memory one again, let's go and have a look at that. In this one, I haven't filtered it. Let's go and actually just focus on the CPU utilization. And what I want is really just for the last 5 minutes. So I could then say, give me where time generated is in the last 5 minutes. So you could go and do that, and you could actually go and do this in a time stamp as well. So I could go back to the, we want to do the average of the value into our timestamp. So we'll go back to time generated and make this 1 minute intervals and group it by computer. And then again, go and render the time chart and show that on our graph. The other option here is that something like this is also, you don't actually always need to have this timestamp, because in things like workbooks and even on the dashboard, you have the ability to go and set your time range so that you don't have to hard code that into your query and make it a lot more dynamic. For alerts, this query is actually kind of ready. So let's make this into 5 minute intervals or even 15-minute intervals. And from here now, I can actually just go and create an alert rule and then specify that in the alert rule, because here it will pick up automatically that we're doing this aggregation. You'll notice that it updates quite quickly. There I've got I can say that's my aggregation. There is my time period because it picked it up from the query. It will run this then every 15 minutes for me. And if I breach the threshold that I set here, it will then give me an alert. I hope that addresses some of these questions.
I think it does. The other piece that I'm picking up on was around how often can we run these things? So like if you had a workbook or a dashboard somewhere, you could run these pretty often, right? They're pretty efficient.
They're pretty efficient. It really depends on how much data you're returning with these queries. So, like we said right in the beginning, is try and limit the time factor or the time period that you're running for, or try and limit how many things you're returning. If I go and just again show you very badly, just running Insight metrics for the last 24 hours, it will tell me that it only returned the first 30,000 results, because it has some throttling built in. It tells you, please narrow down the result. But because here with this, even though we're running this for the same 24-hour period, just because we've added those filters in, it returns this really quickly. And I mean, I can go and sort of hit run and hit run and hit run. Sometimes if I'm returning too much or I'm doing this too often, it may start throttling me. But typically, you could run this, with alerts, especially. We've got those near real-time alerts, and we've now introduced the every 1 minute ability, or the ability to run these queries for alerts every minute. With dashboards, you don't necessarily want to always refresh every minute, but you have the ability to go and set that refresh to every minute or every 5 minutes, whatever. But it really is more about how you've structured that query and how much data you're returning.
Excellent. I think you got it.
Okay, great. So shall we look at resource graph?
Let's do it. Let's take a quick spin through the resource graph before we get to the cap here.
Okay, great. So Azure Resource Graph is a service that you can use completely free. If you want to use it, you want to have a look at it in the portal, you can search for Azure Resource Graph, and or just Resource Graph, and you will find the Resource Graph Explorer, if you can spell. But luckily, Azure is quite resilient to my spelling too. So there's Resource Graph Explorer. And what this gives you is this interface that looks very much like Log Analytics, but it does not rely on you creating a data store in the back end. As soon as you start creating resources in Azure, Resource Graph becomes available to you for you to query. So there's no cost for you to use it. You have the ability to go and just query resources from it. The interface is quite similar in that we've got the ability here to go and choose our categories of resources we want to query, or the different kinds of tables. You've got the ability here to go and scope it. So do I want to run this for the entire directory? Do I want to run it for a specific management group? Or do I want to run this just for a single subscription? So I'm going to limit it just to a few subscriptions, so that, again, we don't have so many resources returned and some throttling happening. And now I can go and run the queries. So again, we've got a query editor over here. We've got the ability to go and run queries from here. We've got some sample queries down at the bottom, and you can save your queries as well here. So let's look at a few things. So if we, for example, wanted to look at maybe how many Log Analytics workspaces do we have, since we've been looking at them. Under Monitor there, I've got Log Analytics workspaces, and if I click on that, it automatically adds that to the query window for me. If I click Run Query there, it will return for me very quickly all the Log Analytics workspaces that I have in those subscriptions that I selected. Now, here is where the interface is slightly different. In Log Analytics, we have that expand option here, which we don't have in Resource Graph yet. But if we scroll all the way across, we've got the See Details, and here we can see the full extent of all of that. And there I've got, things about all the extra properties about my Log Analytics workspaces. So I can see things like, there's my data retention. I can see exactly when I created it. It's a very old workspace. I can see if I've got a quota enabled, have I modified anything recently? And I can also see things like tags on my resources. So what I could do is I could actually say, for this instance, I want to actually query all my resources that have a specific tag on it. So let's go and see how we can do this. So I'm going to just here take out that. If I just run resources, it will return everything. So let's be bold and wild and do that. And this will return all the virtual machines I've got, all the databases I've got, all the workspaces, all of that stuff. All of that will come out here. And this was a very bad idea. So don't do this. It's always that, don't do this at home, kids.
Yeah.
Okay, so there I can see, it's everything that is possibly created there. So probably not a good idea. Now, if I just go back to one of these, again, I can see, I've got tags there, I've got things, but these things are all nested. So what I can do now is I can go and extend a column like we did in Log Analytics, and I can say, I know that my one tag was department, so I can say extend tags dot department. And I can again go and run that. That's going to take forever.
While it's running out, the other difference that I caught here is that with Resource Graph, there's really no time factor to the query results. So we have the time range ability on the workspace where you could say, just give me the past 24 hours, the last hour, whatever. Here, this is real live data based on what's actually been deployed with your resources. So if I change a VM, the properties are then reflected in this query immediately, right?
Near immediately, yes, exactly. So there's one exception to that, and that is that Update Management Center now uses Resource Graph as its data store. So, and there it's got some timestamps for things like your schedules and so on. But other than that, you're absolutely correct. There's no timestamp. This is as real time as you're going to get. So now we can see here, I've extended that department column. And so again, I can go and use summarize like I did before. I can say summarize count by department. And maybe I also want to see resource type. So we'll say by type. And if I run that now, that should then, that's because we were naughty and we didn't convert this to a string. So we've got a little bit more work to do here. But there we go. Now I can see exactly, I've got all my departments there with how many resources they've got. I can even say something like where department equals Northwind. And I can just see for Northwind what resources are deployed. And I can then go and say, look, that's great. And again, we can say do the top 10 by count. So again, I can get my top 10 resource types deployed. Clearly, I have a lot of workbooks. And I can say render bar chart. So again, something very nice to do if you know how to spell and actually do things, but you can go and do that. And then again, you can go and pin this to a dashboard. Now with the Azure Portal dashboards, we do also have natively support there for Resource Graph. So while that's loading, you can go and build a dashboard here. I have one that is, no, I can actually, let's just go and do a new one, or let's go and browse all my dashboard, because I've got quite a nice Resource Graph based dashboard here that apparently is not going to let me show you. But you can then go and say, I've got all my resources listed here, and you can go and build it. So let's actually go and do that. So I've got a dashboard here, and there I've got the all the widgets, and I've got the ability to go and add Resource Graph charts right from here and use them on a dashboard. So again, like in Log Analytics, you have the ability to go and use these in your visualizations. You can also go and show them in workbooks and also in Grafana dashboards.
Nice.
Okay, so, and I think that leaves us maybe with a few minutes for some questions. So do we have any more questions that we haven't addressed?
There may be more that we'll see from the producer, but I do see one that we passed over earlier around the join concept again. And the question was, can you have more than one join in the same query?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we can do that even in here. So I will be like a good TV chef. And I have a pre-prepared query that I use quite often. So if I go and open that, I've got some saved queries, and we'll just look at mine. And maybe we've got this one. So this one, we can see here, we've got resources there. We've got 2 joins in it. Actually, this one doesn't have all of them in it, but I can here go and show all the resources that have the different extensions. I could have split this out with different extensions and then show what the status of those is. So let's modify this one quickly on the fly and see if that works. That's always a fun thing to do. So here I've got the extensions that contains either Azure Monitor or the Microsoft Monitoring Agent. So let's go and do this. I'm going to copy that one. And we will do another one. So this one, we're going to say we only want to have the Azure Monitor one. And in this one, we're going to say we only want the Azure Monitoring Agent one. So now we can again go and say join. And we can again just kind left outer because we want all everything from the first 2 returned, and then I can say on left dot computer name equals right dot computer name. And now in theory, we should have some results that show us all the extensions in one line. So let's see if this worked. Ta-da! Okay, great. So now we've got all the results from the first query, and then if we scroll all the way across, there's from like we saw in the previous one, the name one and everything like that. And then if we scroll over, there is the second set of results. So, and we can see with some of them, there are nulls because there are no values there. So that shows that, how the joins work as well.
Nice. Thanks for covering that. I think that brings us to the wrap up. If we want to just talk about a quick summary of what we learned here today, hopefully it was a good use of folks' time today. And of course, you can always watch this back later. It will be recorded. Yeah, if we can get the view of my screen, we'll just kind of talk through a recap of what we covered here today. So as we mentioned at the beginning, of course, we talked a little bit, got to know each other around, why are we here? Why are we talking about KQL? Where are some of the places you can use it? The most common places, of course, would be around log analytics workspaces, resource graph. Sentinel is another very common place to use this. And Vanessa so kindly took us through the interface, showed us a few tips and tricks around how to get started writing our first queries. And then, of course, we talked about some of the more topics that build upon each other, the idea of being able to filter with the where clause and sorting with order. And then we started looking at even more advanced things, building insights with the different chart types that we have available, join, of course, and the ability to parse text out. In addition to all that, we looked at some of the more common aggregates, the idea of summarizing using the count function for aggregates or the average, all very useful stuff. I learned a bit myself even. I'm in here every day, and it's always nice to talk with you, Vanessa, about KQL, because you are the master.
Thank you, Saul, and thank you everyone for listening to us for the last hour and a half. I hope you had as much fun as we did.
Yeah, thanks very much. Take care, everybody. Great show.
Thank you.